Welcome to our first video on, you guessed it, matrices. So in this video, I'm just going to be giving an introduction to the series and talk about what we're going to cover. First things first, prerequisites. What do you need to know before studying matrices? Well, really just high school algebra. So in particular, I'd like you to know what polynomials are, how to manipulate them, how to factor polynomials, how to find the roots of polynomials. Yeah, just be familiar with polynomials in general. The next thing is complex numbers. It will help you to know what a complex number is. They will come up because you can have, for instance, you can have matrices that have only ones and zeros in them, or you can have matrices that have real numbers in them, or you can have matrices which have complex numbers as entries. So it's going to be helpful for you to know what complex numbers are, how to multiply them, how to take the complex conjugate. You should know the statement of the fundamental theorem of algebra. That's pretty much it for complex numbers. Next thing is functions. Know what a function is, domain, range, independent and dependent variables. These are just math basics, essentially. Also, it will help you to know already what summation notation is. So when I write the sum from n equals 1 to 6 of n squared, you should know exactly what this means. That this is equal to 1 squared plus 2 squared plus 3 squared plus 4 squared plus 5 squared plus 6 squared. That is what that means. Be comfortable with that notation. We're going to be using it pretty frequently. And that's really all the prerequisites. It's just high school algebra, maybe pre-calculus as well. And also it helps to know what a matrix is, but we're going to go completely from the ground up. So if you've never seen a matrix before and you're familiar with all this stuff, you'll do fine. On to the next order of business, the scope of this series. What exactly are we going to be covering? Well, when we talk about the study of matrices, the subjects which naturally arise are sort of your basics. So operations on matrices, definition of a matrix, elementary properties, yeah, just your absolute essentials. Beyond that, you want to talk about determinants. What is a determinant? How do I compute it? What properties does it have? Etc. Another thing you want to talk about is systems of linear equations and or inequalities. We're not going to talk about systems of linear equalities in this series, but we will talk pretty in depth about systems of linear equations. In fact, this is the topic which motivates the introduction of matrices. Then some other stuff you might want to talk about is matrix decompositions. For instance, the LU decomposition or factorization, the QR decomposition, eigen decomposition, singular value decomposition. Another topic you might want to talk about is linear transformations. In other words, matrices viewed as functions or maps from one vector space to another. They're very important in that regard. In fact, that is really the reason matrices are so useful. And lastly, you might want to talk about normal forms. Of course, there are other topics within the study of matrices, but these are just very broad, large topics that one might wish to study. Well, we're not going to be talking about vector spaces. So these last two we are going to leave out. So we can roughly divide our series into 4 parts. We're going to start with systems of linear equations, then we're going to introduce matrices and their operations, and then we're going to talk about determinants, and lastly we're going to finish up with decompositions, ending with the Cayley-Hamilton theorem. In particular, I'm not going to include the singular value decomposition unless I decide to do it as a bonus video. Finally, I want to discuss why. Why a video series on matrices of all topics, specifically matrices divorced from vector spaces. So the first reason is accessibility. I know not everyone in my audience has had calculus or higher mathematics, so I want to make a video series which someone with a good grasp of high school math can get into. Second, I imagine that there are a lot of people out there who want to learn the more applied side of matrices. How do I manipulate them? How do I do certain calculations with them without necessarily wanting to dive into the higher math, such as vector spaces? And the last reason is that I personally find matrices intrinsically interesting, and I think it's kind of sad that we only study them as tools for vector spaces. So I want to put out a few videos for those of you who are not interested in so much in learning about vector spaces, but are interested in learning about matrices for the sake of matrices. Thanks for watching, and I'm looking forward to this series with you.